Gresham College presents Debussy, Text and Ideas, Time-Full Interiors, Debussy, Fête galante and the Salon of Marguerite de Saint-Marceaux by Emma Adlard.
Thank you, Helen, for that very rich paper. And I'm sure you're all formulating questions, and I think we are going to do well to be able to ask a few after this last paper. Our final speaker this morning is Emma Adlard. Emma is a PhD candidate at King's College London, and she's working on a dissertation on women's patronage in 20th century French music. It's true that much of the chamber music that we enjoy from this period owed its existence to female patrons. Her paper today is going to be thinking about how this kind of patronage and especially the space of the patronage, the salon in particular, can inform our understanding of a work of evocative piano music by Debussy. Her title is different from what's in your program, so I'm going to say it slowly. Time-Full Interiors, Debussy, the Fête galante, and the Salon of Marguerite de Saint-Marceaux. Emma.
Thank you. There should be a handout also on your chair with 2 musical examples which you might want to look at towards the end of my paper. Friday the 13th. In the evening, dinner at Madame de Saint-Marceaux's. Afterwards, everyone asked me to play Rimsky's Concerto for Piano, accompanied by Messager. Everyone in awe, they then asked me to play, back in the salon downstairs, the new works by Debussy, Masques and L'Île Joyeuse. They were excited by my performance. Pujol, Blanche, the Saint-Marceaux, etc. About 20 people were there. This brief entry, recorded in the diary of the Catalan pianist Ricardo Viñez, offers a tantalizing glimpse of the avant-première of Claude Debussy's L'Île Joyeuse for piano, an event that took place on Friday the 13th of January 1905 at the Parisian Salon of Marguerite de Saint-Marceaux. Although no doubt influenced by Paul Verlaine's Fête galante poems of 1869, Debussy's L'Île Joyeuse is believed to have been inspired principally by Antoine Watteau's Fête galante painting of 1718-19, L'Embarquement pour Cythère. Debussy was not alone in his infatuation with Watteau. On returning to Paris in 1887, following a 2-year stint in Rome, the composer found the French capital captivated by a Rococo revival led by the naturalist writers and aristocrats Jules and Edmond Goncourt. 18th century fête galante paintings held a special fascination, especially those by Watteau, who invented the genre. These artworks, inspired by the enchanted worlds of Venice and Versailles, depicted such refined pursuits of elegant high society as gallant conversation, music making, and masquerade in intimate parkland settings. Demand by French salonières and socialites at the turn of the century for musical works that thematized these courtly recreations, such as Debussy's L'Île Joyeuse, was at its peak. While records of the avant-première of L'Île Joyeuse are scarce, more general testimonies relating to the Saint-Marceaux salon or to Debussy's piano piece are more numerous. Taken together, these accounts raise intriguing questions of class, gender, performance space, and artistic inspiration. For the purposes of this paper, I intend to focus on just the last 2, namely the suitability of an intimate salon milieu for the first performance of L'Île Joyeuse, and the implications of Debussy's compositional influences. In order to provide answers to these questions, however, I need first to inquire into the changing understandings of time and space at the fin de siècle. Second, to delineate this period's restoration of the Rococo style. And third, to look closely at Watteau's Fête galante tableau. Only then will we be ready to return to the Saint-Marceaux salon and to Debussy's Island of Pleasure. While the introduction of world standard time in France in 1891 achieved its principal aim, greater uniformity of public time, it also had a more unexpected consequence. by drawing attention to the pluralities of time, even as it sought to eradicate them. Standard time spawned a vast body of theory affirming private, heterogeneous temporalities. In particular, the idea of a simultaneous present, thickened with retentions and protensions of the past and future, was a theory that was to prove highly influential for writers, scientists, and artists alike. At the end of the 19th century, the French philosopher Henri Bergson revolutionized the traditional understanding of temporality as a unidirectional series of fixed points. According to his theory of la durée, which he first defined in 1889 as, quote, a succession of qualitative changes which melt into and permeate one another, end quote, time is always in the act of becoming. It is an indivisible flux in which experiences of past, present, and future interpenetrate. Bergson's influential philosophy was to make a strong impression on Marcel Proust in the early years of the 20th century. Along with writers such as James Joyce and Virginia Woolf, Proust transformed the novel's sense of time and space into a modernist heterogeneity of temporalities and locales that shifted with the changing perceptions of human subjectivities. A characteristic example of this is the episode in La Prisonnière, the fifth volume of À la recherche du temps perdu, in which the musical continuity of the narrator's solitary performance of Vinteuil and Wagner opposes his more flexible experience of time, as he only half attentively listens to his own musical production. For musicologist Cormac Newark, this scene's unresolved tension between exterior performance in time and interior reflection out of time, which he describes as a Proustian subjective doublethink, gives À la recherche musical structure. Quote, not that it is organised on a large scale according to specifically musical principles of form, as many have claimed, but that in its descriptions of the process of opera, it keeps in such obvious and constant tension the listener's engagement with musical movement through time and his mysterious magical detachment from it, end quote. The fact that Proust employed a musical episode to explore temporal complexity is no coincidence. La durée was believed to be almost impossible to express verbally, and by the early 20th century, music's status as the simultaneous art par excellence was widely accepted. Its contrapuntal possibilities provided the archetype for painting and poetry alike. Above all, it would seem that the elusive music of Claude Debussy was believed to capture most accurately the indeterminable condition of human experience in time. The French musicologist Louis Laloy spoke of secret correspondences linking Debussy's compositions with Bergson's theories, and Bergson himself described Debussy's music as une musique de la durée. Whilst French philosophers, writers, and artists at the turn of the century demonstrated a peculiar interest in the experience of a simultaneous present time, the past commanded a related fascination of its own. For Bergson and Proust, for example, the past constituted a vital source of freedom and joy and derived its meaning from its positive impact upon the present. The resurgent appeal of the 18th century Rococo aesthetic at the fin de siècle thus appears more than coincidental. For a generation whose confident sense of the future was marred by an ambivalence towards the inexorable progress of the present, the Rococo's repudiations of the sublime, of ambition, and of power may well have seemed apt. In addition, the notion of the interior was as much a preoccupation of the 20th century as it was of the 18th. With the X-ray now able to reveal the internal anatomy of the human body, Freud's expose of unconscious psychological processes, and the Cubist artistic representation of objects' interiors, it is commonly thought that the internal realm during the early 1900s seemed more fundamental and accessible than ever before. During the reign of Louis XV, that is 1750 to 1774, the French understood what would retrospectively be identified as the Rococo style, specifically in terms of interiority and retreat. According to Deborah Silverman, the turn of the century appeal of the Rococo lay above all in its ability to triumph over industrialization and metropolitan invasiveness via a retreat to a blissful interior. The image of a withdrawal to a secluded haven is captured potently in the Fête galante tableau of Rococo artist Antoine Watteau, not least in his L'Embarquement pour Cythère, which enjoyed renewed fame at the fin de siècle. Yet it is not only this painting's representation of private space that aligns it with the concerns of the early 1900s, but also its representation of time. While scholars have attached great importance to the question of whether L'Embarquement depicts an arrival at or departure from the idyllic island of Cythère, it may in fact be more productive to imagine this painting from a modernist perspective as a daring eschewal of rational time. In other words, I would agree with musicologist Michael Klein that there is no need to decide categorically between these two alternatives. The ambiguity is entirely the point. For me, Watteau succeeds in representing temporal opposites simultaneously, the effect of stasis associated with the ecstasy of arrival, as well as the demand of time signified by the pilgrim's departure. This is an impression that is captured in microcosm by the curvature of the three couples poised on the hillock, which suggests both progressive motion in time, as Julianne Plax has noted, and a curious equipoise, in the words of Michael Klein. In an analysis of 1911, Auguste Rodin described these figures as participating in une longue action. The pair on the left have risen, but turn back towards the central man and woman who are getting to their feet. This couple is in turn connected to the pilgrims on the far right, who are not as yet disturbed by the passage of time. In this way, Watteau portrays concurrently a journey's beginning, undertaking, and completion. The central female figure in particular, who remains firmly seated like the right-hand couple, yet is being pulled hurriedly to her feet by her lover, seems simultaneously to pine for her past, cling on to the present moment, and make haste towards her future. One might view the early 20th century salon in similar terms, as a progressive yet reclusive milieu that promoted both intimate sociability and private reflection. The salon represented a space that thrived on the irreconcilability of its conflicting attributes. The Salon of Marguerite de Saint-Marceaux, which provided Proust with his model for the Verdurin salon in À la Recherche, was characteristic of this definition. Its deliberately designed intimacy, for example, was noted by the saloniers' guests. As the French composer Charlotte Zoe Leby explained, quote, "The seats were grouped with an accomplished art in order to create corners of intimacy where one was extremely well placed for conversation." End quote. A number of portraits sketched by Marguerite's visitors within her salon suggest that this milieu was also one conducive to private contemplation. What is so intriguing about these drawings is how many depict a solitary figure in solemn meditation, often with their eyes closed or with their head resting pensively on a hand. Contrary to what might be deemed a typically modernist blank stare, epitomised by the subject of Manet's Un bal aux folies bergères, the salon habitués represented by these drawings keep their eyes firmly closed. Like Proust's narrator in La Prisonnière, they turn self-consciously inwards. Emilio della Suda's portrait of Ricardo Viñes at the piano depicts the musician with his eyes firmly shut, lost in thought, as if the music has transported him somewhere beyond the here and now. Could Viñes possibly be playing Debussy's L'Île Joyeuse? Akin to Watteau's L'Embarquement pour Cythère, which offers a fantastical image of an 18th century haven, L'Île Joyeuse is a work that affords its listener the opportunity to retreat into an interior dream world. In particular, the work's initial cadenza functions ritualistically, according to James Hepikowski, as a threshold, quote, linking secular and sacred or aesthetic space, linking the normal but sadly banal and unclean world with the pure world of enchantment and art, end quote. Moreover, Watteau's representation of both stasis and the relentless march of time within a single painting is a technique imitated by Debussy in L'Île Joyeuse. within the structure of the work's open, irreversible wedge progression, in the words of Roy Howard, localized instances of stasis and circularity subsist, especially in the form of non-developmental melodic patterns, non-goal-oriented harmonies, and pedal points. Whenever the music becomes overly insistent, driving ever towards its conclusion, Debussy almost always holds it in check. Arguably the most conspicuous example of this is the passage beginning at bar 67. Hoping we might hear this now. Marked un peu cédé, molto rubato, time here is literally cédé, or surrendered, an impression aided by the undulating quintuplet semiquavers in the left hand that obscure the straight quaver rhythms of the right hand. At this moment, the pianist is instructed to defy the progressive musical narrative of L'Île Joyeuse and to give in to his or her own flexible sense of time. In its vacillation between static and more vigorous passages, then, L'Île Joyeuse might be seen to embody Cormac Newark's notion of the Proustian subjective double-think, when an exterior engagement with music's advancement in time exists in an ambiguous relationship with an interior, out-of-time experience. Although not a reconciliation as such, the climax beginning at bar 220 achieves its potency from the ambiguous simultaneity, I suggest, of the static and the dynamic. At this moment, the boundaries demarcating interior and exterior become blurred, and the two states finally coincide. Although marked fortissimo and featuring urgent rhythmic articulation, the performer is nonetheless instructed to play this passage un peu cédé, and to bring the inner melodic voice suspended over the bar lines to the foreground. Debussy thus chooses to inscribe this euphoric climax with the ecstasy of inertia. Although Debussy's music has often been described as timeless, something closer to time full would therefore seem more appropriate a characterization. Just like the central female figure in Watteau's L'Embarquement pour Cythère, L'Île Joyeuse holds fast to the present moment and yet hastens to its destiny. Ultimately, Debussy's music, like Watteau's art, inhabits an ambiguous temporal mode of simultaneity. While to my knowledge no record exists of Marguerite de Saint-Marceaux's own response to the avant-première of L'Île Joyeuse in her salon, it would seem that she tended to locate the brilliance of Debussy's music in its intimacy and invitation to private reverie. In her journal, she describes Debussy's Pour le piano as unique and private music, and the first two movements of his nocturnes as, quote, exquisite works of art, music of dream and feeling. I close my eyes and I am completely satisfied. This music realizes all my desires for art. It sums up my most acute feelings, end quote. Perhaps, however, Marguerite's most revealing diary entry regarding her affinity with the music of Debussy is that anticipating a performance of Pelléas et Mélisande at the Opera Comique in 1902. Quote, I am going to hear Pelléas et Mélisande hidden at the back of an opera box, and to enjoy jouir, the purest art ever written in music, end quote. Marguerite's excitement at the prospect of experiencing Pelléas in the privacy of an opera box suggests that a secluded space is best suited to experience the jouissance of Debussy's art. Similarly, the intimate Saint-Marceaux salon might be considered an especially suitable performance setting for L'Île Joyeuse, and all the more so, given the work's 18th century inspiration, For, as K.R. Ireland has argued, the Rococo aesthetic finds its most characteristic expression in interior milieu. While the influence of the Fête galante on Debussy's music has previously been explored, here I have expanded the interpretive sphere in order to incorporate the salon environment. To engage with this locale would seem to be an illuminating move when it comes to dealing with questions of time and space. In their invitation to subjective reverie, Debussy's L'Isle joyeuse and the Saint-Marceaux salon seem to have functioned symbiotically to ensure the recuperation of private temporalities and milieu, both real and imagined, that were threatened by more public notions of time and space at the fin du siècle. Moreover, in the 20th century French imagination, looking back, for example, to the 18th century, necessarily also implied looking ahead and vice versa. It is indeed this same ambiguous sense of temporal simultaneity that connects Watteau's L'embarquement pour Cythère, Debussy's L'Isle joyeuse, and the Salon of Marguerite de Saint-Marceaux. Their timefulness and interiority, I propose, are vital sources of their efficacy. Ultimately, a simplistic conflation of French modernism, speed, and progress, as has tended to be the norm in popular history, remains open to discussion. For a generation that aspired to triumph over time and space, images of stasis, nostalgia, and retrospectivism were equally prevalent and expedient, and therefore just as characteristic of the French modernist movement. While an interpretive dance, such as the present discussion between painting, music, and space, will thus always involve leaps of faith, bringing these media into close contact in this context has revealed intriguing connections between the three and serves to challenge our existing, albeit deficient, understanding of the meaning of French modernism. Thank you.
For all information, please visit www.gresham.ac.uk.